Welcome back to the Get Out of Debt podcast with your debt expert, Steve Rhode. Steve is an expert in helping people get out of debt and assist people for free with advice and guidance through his site at getoutofdebt.org. If you have a debt issue you'd like to have him answer, just visit getoutofdebt.org and submit your question online.
Well, I'm back with Damon Day from damonday.com. We're talking more about debt. That's all we all freaking talk about. And this week we're going to be talking about... Damon, what the hell are we talking about this week?
We're talking about the debt buyer lawsuits.
Debt buyer lawsuits, that's right. You know, the problem is that every week there's something new that comes up. It's a never-ending cycle. And if you want to learn more, you can visit my site. I'm Steve Rhode, and my site is getoutofdebt.org. Or you can visit damonday.com and learn a lot of information, stuff that I don't even talk about. Like how to cook roadkill or something, right?
Yeah, like I'm frequently fond of saying, I'm just a hack with a laptop. So,
you know, on my old radio show, one of the topics that we always talked about at first was what we had for lunch. Not that it was relevant or anything, but just what we had for lunch. So I'd like to bring back that kind of historical question, and for the very first time, ask you, what did you have for lunch today?
I haven't eaten yet today. No. I woke up. I was up until about 2 o'clock, so I got up about 9:30. No, I did. I had a bagel. I forgot. I had a bagel for breakfast, but I have not eaten lunch.
Well, I had lunch today with a couple of very nice members of the Attorney General's office, chatting about a lot of stuff going on in the debt relief world. And luckily, we went to this nice restaurant. Boy, they know how to pick them. I had grilled shrimp over spinach with a little side, as they called it, Sprite melon. I'd never heard that before, Sprite melon.
Well, I guess my bagel with cream cheese can't compete.
No, it can't. It sucked. Oh, and then for dessert, I had blueberry pound cake with fresh ice cream on it. And your bagel sucks. All right, so this week we're going to be talking about debt buyers, and there's been a lot of information in the news about this, not only about companies buying debt, but also a story that Amanda Miller from my site, the getoutofdebt.org site, did, I think it was last week, about people who are being arrested after they've been sued by a debt buyer. And while the story that originally came out from another source was talking about, if you're in debt, you will be arrested, in fact, that's not the case. If you stick your head in the sand and you don't deal with the lawsuit, be it from a debt buyer, and you totally ignore the court, you can be arrested for contempt of court and forced to fill out some paperwork. But debt buyers is a huge industry, and people are buying debt cheaply. And for one of the very first times, I actually saw a report that said that some of these publicly traded debt buyers are purchasing large volumes of debt that has been charged off, and maybe you can explain that in a second, Damon, and they're paying as little as 4 cents on the dollar for this debt. So essentially, they're just dumping it in a hopper and suing everybody, right?
It's actually a huge problem, and it's really been going on for a long time. I even had some personal experience back 7, 8 years ago with this stuff. So yeah, it's becoming more and more popular as a way for a lot of these debt collectors to just get a lot of default judgments and then really lean on consumers, whether they owe the money or not, to just pay up. It's almost kind of getting to the point where it borders on blackmail.
Yeah, what's interesting is that the debt buyers are buying these large groups of charged-off debts or debts that have attempted to been collected on before by a different company, and they're not buying, while in a perfect world it would be great if they bought the total ownership of the debt and it was then their debt. In fact, what they're buying are just kind of large database dumps that say, Bob Smith owes $12,000 without any backup documentation.
That's exactly right. And what happens is the system is really designed in a way to where they can simply file a lawsuit, and they know that, if they spend a few $100s filing a lawsuit, the average consumer is not going to respond to it. They're not going to know how to respond to it. Typically, they're not going to have the money to hire an attorney, or maybe the lawsuit's not even large enough that would justify hiring an attorney. And for the most part, consumers ignore these things because they don't know where to get the help from. So these debt buyers know that they can just file these lawsuits for a couple $100, and most of the time they will just be able to get an automatic default judgment 30 to 60 days later. And now they've got a lot more leverage to really put the screws to consumers to collect that money, much more so than just calling up and asking for it.
So I would say that probably, and I think I've seen this statistic before, that about 90% of people who get sued for debt just never show up at court, and they just automatically lose. But this debt buyer thing brings up a whole nother aspect to it, because somebody else, some new entity, has bought an old debt of yours through one or two different cycles. And there's a good chance that if you get something in the mail saying you owe this debt, you're not going to recognize the name at all.
Oh, yeah. I think the word you're looking for is racket.
I didn't realize I was, but thank you.
Oh, just in case you can use that.
Okay. Well, you're saying it is a racket. You're saying that they just buy this debt cheaply, sue everybody, and know that they're going to come out ahead in the end.
Well, yeah, I don't want to mischaracterize it where every debt collection company's out there doing that. But yeah, there certainly are firms that, they know that this is a great way to collect money. I mean, to play devil's advocate for a second, on one hand, if you didn't have any morals and you didn't really care about, much other than making money, when you think about it, it's a great business strategy. If you look at it from that standpoint, where they're going to buy all this debt, and what's going to differentiate, if I'm a consumer and I owe 10 different debts, and I can't pay all of them, am I more likely to pay attention to one that is actually in the court versus the other ones that are just calling me and sending me letters? Yeah, I am. I'm probably, if I have enough money, or at least some money, I'm probably going to negotiate and try to figure out how to get out of this one that's in court. So if I am a debt buyer and I have that ability to do it, and again, I'm not saying I would, but from a business standpoint, it makes a lot of sense. Throw everything against the wall, sue everybody they can, and 95% of the people or so probably won't respond. Easy default judgment, and now you can start garnishing wages, putting liens on homes or levies on bank accounts, things like that, doing things that are going to get the consumer's attention and get them to pick up the phone and say, please, 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 how can I remove this garnishment? That's
why I think that we'll see more debt buyers resorting to this having people arrested trick, simply because it is probably a great motivator to get the attention of somebody that's had their head in the sand, to actually have a police officer come cuff them and take them down and book them.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't want to completely freak out everybody listening to this, so we should clarify that, those people weren't arrested because they owed debt. They were, those cases were because of a contempt of court charge, because they were ordered to show up probably for an interrogatory hearing or something like that to see where they worked and where their assets were, and they ignored the order,
That's
correct?
Exactly right, yes. So, if you do get sued, I guess the lesson that should be learned, and the lesson that everyone should hear, is you should go to court and you should fight it. And if you are being sued by a debt buyer, especially, you should go and ask for proof that the debt is actually yours.
Well, absolutely. And I mean, the problem though is, people are deathly afraid of court. It's kind of like, they talk about fear of public speaking is like, right up there along with the fear of death,
Mm-hmm.
And going to court is kind of like public speaking on steroids, because not only are you have to be doing some public speakings, but you're in a court of law, you're facing the judge, there's people in the gallery, there's the plaintiffs there, and this is a very foreign environment for most consumers. And it's a lot easier for them to ignore it, but it is very important not to ignore it, because like most other things, ignoring a lawsuit does not make it better. It makes it much worse.
So what do you say? What should a consumer say when they go to court and they're being sued by a debt buyer for a debt that they don't recognize?
Well, I mean, that's a real loaded question, because there's a lot of things that go into it. And every state's different. And, let me preface this with, I'm not an attorney, so I can't be giving legal advice. I just mainly speak from personal experience and secondhand experience from clients and people that I've talked to. But every court has their own, rules of evidence and, what you can do and what you can't do. And the problem in a court environment is there are very specific rules that you have to adhere to. Like if you have a lawsuit or a summons and you have to have a specific answer. You typically can't just show up and say, well, Your Honor, I don't know the money. They want a verbal response in most jurisdictions is not fun. You have to actually write a response. And then many courts are very particular where, you can't just get out a sheet of paper and write, I hereby declare I don't know this money. Then that's not going to be a properly formatted answer, and it would be rejected by the clerk of the court. So
the dog
that's what makes it. Well, what was it?
The dog ate my debt, or I left it on the bus. For value.
Yeah, but that's the problem with the system, and these debt buyers know it. They know it's not as easy as just showing up on the day you're supposed to show up and tell the judge what's happening, and then the judge says, "Oh, I understand. Okay, this case is dismissed." There has to be a procedure that needs to be followed, and that's why it makes it so difficult for consumers, because they don't know what to do. They can't hire an attorney. In most municipalities and jurisdictions, they've got some kind of low cost or no cost legal aid where at least you can go and say, look, I just got sued. What do you suggest? What can I do? But there are some very specific things that you can do, which is suggested in your article here by Amanda. If the actual plaintiff is a debt buyer and not an original creditor, the consumer does have a lot more options, because it's a lot more difficult for a debt purchaser to actually meet their burden of proof in a civil case than it is for the original creditor that might have all of the card charge statements and the initial application and things like that.
So if it's a debt buyer, it's somebody you don't recognize as having a relationship with them initially, then actually there's a pretty good chance that if you ask for proof to verify that this is actually your debt, they're not going to be able to provide it. Because let's talk for a second about what a debt buyer actually gets when they purchase these large groups of debts. They're not getting files that have a printed copy of your original application that's legible, are they?
No, typically not. They're typically just getting, like you mentioned earlier, it's a computer printout. They're buying a huge portfolio, and, John Smith owes $10,000 to this creditor. Oh, that's what they know.
I spoke to a legal aid attorney earlier, and he was telling me that in his legal aid days, that it was uncommon for a consumer to be sued for, say, less than $5,000. But it's happening more and more for smaller amounts, just because it's kind of become a pipeline that once you start feeding it with all size accounts, it really doesn't matter how much it costs to sue. You're just going to sue everybody.
Yeah, and the thing that when you're dealing with a third party, there's a lot of issues that come into play, and one of the biggest issues is ownership of the account and whether or not they even have the ability or the legal right to file suit, because they might not even own the debt or own the rights to collect on that debt. But the problem with the court systems, when we're specifically talking about these kinds of cases, is that the judge cannot advocate on behalf of the defendant. It's not the judge's job to decide what to do or what not to do unless the defendant puts the question in front of the judge. So, for instance, there's a big problem that's out there with these complaints that are actually time barred by the statute of limitations, where, let's say, there's a 4-year statute of limitations in your state on a debt, and a debt buyer gets a hold of it later on. It's 7 years old, and they file a complaint. Well, the judge is not there to look at the complaint, look at the evidence, and try to gather more evidence and then say, wait a minute, this is time barred, I'm going to kick this out. That's not what the judge is there for. It would be up to the defendant to respond to the complaint with either a pre-answer motion to dismiss because of the statute of limitations, or an answer and allege it as an affirmative defense. But that's why it's so important not to ignore these things, but that's what makes it so difficult, is because it would be up to the defendant, the consumer in this case, to understand the rules, understand the law, understand the specific rules at that local court, and then be able to properly format the appropriate response to put the decision to the judge, to then let the judge decide, oh yeah, I see, okay, this has been time barred.
I oftentimes hear people say, well, I don't want to spend $200 or $300 and hire an attorney to help me. But I got to tell you that getting good, competent legal counsel at a time that you're sued is almost priceless. And another thing that people don't realize is they say to me, Steve, if I get sued and I have to go to court, well, I'm going to tell the judge, here's what I think is reasonable. If you're sued, it's not about what's reasonable. It's about what is appropriate and available and agreed to under the law.
Exactly, and that goes back to, again, the format. You can't just go into the court and then, well, here's what I'm going to tell the judge. And it's not like Judge Judy. It doesn't work that way, where on TV you watch these court shows and they just show up and the judge is smiling and laughing and friendly and they banter back and forth and the judge hears both sides and then says, okay, I believe you, I don't believe you, so let's go home. That's not how it works in these kind of situations. Everything is done typically in the pleadings, and actually very little is done in oral arguments. Most of the stuff is done in the pleadings, and the judge, I can't just generalize, obviously, but many times the judge already has his mind made up what he's going to do before the hearing even starts, unless you say something in the hearing that you left out of the pleadings that's going to change his mind. But he's supposed to or going to review the pleadings first and know what he's going to rule before he even start. But again, it all comes down to if you're dealing with the debt buyer and you're getting sued, if it's the original creditor and you actually owe the money, in many cases, I would say, look, if you're going to hire an attorney, you're getting sued for $5,000, and the attorney wants a $3,000 retainer, and it's the original creditor, and you owe the money.
Yeah, pay it.
You're better off just trying to contact that attorney that's suing you and try to get some kind of a settlement out of that than paying.
Yeah.
Because that's all the attorney's going to do. Because if you don't have a valid defense, he's going to say, well, we have to settle the case. So,
and that's my point exactly. Is that it seems that in those types of cases that you just mentioned, the court is going to take a look at your case and they're going to say, well, I'm going to decide this as a matter of law, and as a matter of law, you have a written contract with Chase Bank, for example, where you agreed to pay X amount of dollars. You don't dispute that you borrowed the money, and they were sending you statements over a long period of time. That's not something you're going to be able to wiggle your way out of. You just need to deal with it and come up with an arrangement on how to pay it. Or if you can't pay it at all, then you need to think about other legal solutions like bankruptcy that would kill the lawsuit and avoid any judgment or garnishment and allow you to get a fresh start with your debt. Exactly.
And but when you're dealing with a third party, it's a game changer, because now it's highly unlikely that if you put their feet to the fire, they would actually be able to meet their burden of proof. So I would certainly recommend getting some help, some legal advice, if you're being sued for $5,000 or more by a debt buyer that doesn't really have any evidence against you. And again, every state is different, because if you read Steve's article, they even talk about that 95% of the cases where they actually sent some discovery to these plaintiff attorneys that were filing suit, 95% of the time the attorneys never responded, which means they were counting on a slam dunk default judgment and weren't even interested in actually pursuing the case if they had to work for it.
Now, if anybody wants to read that article that we've both been talking about, they can go to getoutofdebt.org/20012, and that'll take you to most debt buyer lawsuits foiled by inability to prove debt owed. Now, you brought up another good point. You only are entitled to 2 good points a show, by the way. And,
okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah, you've used them all now. The rest are going to be shit. In that, when you're experiencing money problems, debt problems, it's all intimidating, scary, you don't know what to do, which brings me around to why many people fall victim to debt relief schemes that seem too good to be true. They latch onto something that they think is going to immediately solve their problems.
Yeah, that you hit the nail right on the head, because under normal let's just look at debt settlement, for example, because we pick on that a lot on our sites, and it's just a very easy target based on what they do and why I consider most debt settlement companies to be an absolute scam, 100% fraud. And I can prove that, and if anybody that runs a front-loaded fee debt settlement company wants to come on and lay out a methodical, coherent argument about why what they do is somehow beneficial to their clients, I'm more than happy to listen. But these guys can prey on consumers that are just in a very scared and vulnerable state because they don't know what to do. They're deathly afraid of court. They're afraid of lawsuits. They don't have the money to pay this debt. And they hear these ads about, we'll get your creditors off your back. We're going to work with you. We're attorneys, so we'll help you. And, I mean, they do all kinds of things essentially just to tell the consumer what they want to hear to make them feel better. And they offer the false hope that if you just come on board with us, you can stop stressing about this because we're going to take that burden from you. And that's how they can get consumers to buy into these programs that under normal circumstances they would look at and say, you're going to charge me what? When? Forget it. But they're not dealing under normal circumstances, and these debt settlement companies really play on that and take advantage of people because they know they're in this vulnerable state.
You know, there have been some other schemes or scams, whatever you want to call them, that have preyed on people too. There's been the approach that we can write something on the back of a check that says that it modifies the terms of your original agreement and creditors aren't going to be able to collect on it. And then there's the other approach that people get charged for, which is you were never really lent money in the beginning, and so there's nothing really to collect. You know, it's all these scams outside of the debt settlement thing that we just talked about are just, you would think that they're totally unrealistic and nobody would fall for them, but people fall for them all the time.
Yeah, because, I mean, again, you take somebody that's in a very vulnerable state, people seek out what they want to hear, right? And when they're in a vulnerable state, they're looking to get on Google, and they just start looking until they find somebody that's saying what they want to hear, which is, I can get you out of debt. That's what I can do for you. And they say, okay, I'm going to listen to this guy. And they're really hoping that this is the right answer. So they're listening to this guy, or they're reading their website through the filter of, I want this to be true. So everything in them wants this to be true because this is the panacea they're looking for. Where you mentioned some of these other scams where they'll take over your debt for you, or you'll be able to, you know, all you have to do is give this company $5,000 and they're going to send these fancy dispute letters, and all of your debt just gets melted away because the money was never really there in the first place. And there's all kinds of different twists and turns on this kind of stuff, and everybody's got, you know, a different bow on pretty much the same box of crap. But what I try to tell consumers is, think about it like this. Anytime you're listening to these guys, whatever it is, whether it's, you know, the no money lent theory, or you can accept it for value, or we're going to dispute it under the FDCPA, and they're not going to come back and validate the debt, and therefore it's just going to go away like magic. Whatever it is, and I learned this way back when I was dealing with my own debt. However good it sounds to you, imagine yourself in front of a state or a federal judge and explaining this, because that's what is probably going to happen. At some point, you're going to be in front of a judge, and the judge is going to be looking at you and saying, okay, so explain to me how you don't owe the money. And now imagine you trying to be in front of a judge and saying, well, my signature created the money, so they used that as an asset, and then they turned it around, and they really just lent me my own money. And I've seen this many times. I'm very familiar with this kind of stuff. I've been in court when people were arguing this stuff, and the judge typically looks at them and says, well, did you get stuff for that?
Well, yeah,
did you get it?
Good question.
Yeah. Did you get a TV? Did you get anything? Did you get a benefit from this arrangement?
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Okay. So you got stuff, and then you never paid it back. So the reality is, it doesn't matter, even if it's true, even if what they're saying is absolutely true. If the judge that you're going to be in front of is not going to buy it, or probably not going to buy it, it doesn't matter if it's true or not. So if it's not going to pass a federal judge would totally buy this story if I was standing in front of him, it's not something you want to do, because that's probably where you're going to end up.
And, you know, it just doesn't make much sense. I agree with you. This whole kind of vapor money theory, they never really lent me money to begin with, and all that stuff. The problem is that, let's say that a court did say crazily, you know, you don't owe that money, the entire commerce system in America would collapse.
Absolutely. Which is why you're not going to have a federal or a state judge say, yeah, that makes sense, let's go with that guy. They're not going to do it.
And consumers pay thousands of dollars to companies that advertise their services that they're going to guarantee get you out of debt by. That's the other one that I find very humorous too. You mentioned it, the assignment of debt, where you allegedly assign your debt over to one of these companies, and then they contact your creditor and do all sorts of hocus pocus and supposedly magically make the debt go away. you can't unilaterally assign your debt to somebody else.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite ones, and I'm a little rusty on the arguments because it's been a few years. But I think that's what was it? CMS is that what it is, Steve?
Well,
CMS that was doing that.
There's another
with
company,
Brad Daly?
CCDN, that was doing that too. Essentially,
Yeah, they were doing a little bit different way.
Well, essentially, the argument is that you assign your debt to us, we're going to send a letter to the creditor along with your next minimum payment that says, hey, by the way, creditor, we reserve the right to modify the terms of the agreement. Here are the new terms, and if you cash the check, you're agreeing to it.
Well, my favorite part of that, and this was actually on their website, but what always kind of made me, I don't want to say smile because it's very serious stuff because people are really getting hurt by this stuff, was they would use the argument, I think the official term they were using was, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. and essentially what they were proposing was that, well, the banks have the right to change the contract anytime they want, and then they would play onto that, kind of whip up the consumer about, doesn't that piss you off that you signed this contract at 0% and now they change it to 10 and then they change it to 21, and at any time they can send you a notice that says, well, now it's this and now it's that. Mm-hmm. Isn't that unfair? Yeah, that's unfair. Well, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. So if they can do it, we can do it too. And then see, that kind of makes sense to a consumer that doesn't really understand how contract law works and what you have to do to have consideration and actually have a meeting of the minds to change a contract. It kind of sounds like it might make sense. Well, yeah, if they can do it, I should be able to do it.
Yeah,
so that's how they kind of
leave out is the very important part that you, the consumer, agreed that they could do that.
Exactly, because they're not forcing the credit card on you. So they could do whatever they want. They could say, okay, if you want this credit card, this is our money. We're going to give it to you, and here's our terms. If we want to change the terms whenever we want, those are our terms. If you don't like that, don't take our credit card.
Yeah, if you owe debt and you want to avoid getting scammed, getting ripped off, losing money in dealing with the situation, then you really need to get some good, honest advice about what is available. Now, some of the realistic solutions to dealing with this may not be fun, may not be pretty, might be intimidating or certainly scary, but a magical solution that some out-of-the-way site talks about that you've never heard anywhere else, that has, unfortunately, I find that they tend to have like forums or discussions that are very fringe people, arguing about, is America really a country? I mean, just things that are just way out there. These are not mainstream theories, and they're definitely not going to get you a mainstream solution.
Yeah, and I looked into a lot of that stuff years and years ago. I was really heavily immersed in it, and for a while I was kind of on that Kool-Aid too. And my experience in actual court here in the real world was what just shook me back to reality. That says, and again, it's very simple. Even if that stuff maybe is true, or they start talking about, well, the United States is a corporation, and your name in all caps is your straw name, and it's an entity, and you could copyright that, and all this crazy stuff that they do, which may or may not even be true or legal or what. It all comes down to, if you end up in front of a judge, do you confidently think you can argue that theory and get the judge to say, yeah, let's go with that? And if the answer is no, you can't see yourself in front of a federal judge explaining what a straw man is and how you can accept this for value or whatever it is that they're espousing, then that's not something you want to go down, because it's going to get you in a lot more trouble.
Yeah, and there are a number of lawsuits and cases and appeals and everything else that have happened before where this has been discussed by the courts. And I had shared one with you not that long ago about this whole kind of vapor money theory where the court basically said, yeah, that's not going to fly.
Yeah.
So and the
thing is,
mm-hmm.
Well, the thing is, in this day and age, especially the digital day and age, anybody with any kind of a theory can create a website in one day, put some stuff on there, and have his new theory about this, that, or the other thing. And it's going to take a while. If it's a total scam, it's going to take several years typically for the authorities to catch up to it. And if it's not even that big, they might not ever catch up to it. This stuff goes on all the time, and people don't get caught, and they go on scamming people. The ones that usually get caught are the ones that catch on, and they get so big that once people realize that really was a scam and it's been proven in court that it doesn't work, you might be 2, 3, 4 years down the road, and you might have 50,000 people that have gone down that road thinking, well, when I signed up, there was nothing bad out there on the internet about it because nobody has had the bad experience yet, or it hasn't been in court yet. And so they can do that for 3 or 4 years, collecting money the whole time. And then when the heat starts to finally come down on them, they just close their doors and, or file bankruptcy or pop up under some different name doing something else, which is, the same box of crap, but they put a different bow on it.
And what's funny is that a lot of these guys do just that. They close down, change their business name, and reopen up, and they're so easy to track. Now,
Well, you had a recent article about that, I think, today or yesterday,
yeah, Bob
right?
Lindsay, guy in Texas. He had a company called the Credit Card Solution. The Attorney General in Texas sued him, shut him down, and he's opened up a new site, and the mailing address is the exact same mailbox service that the old one was. So it wasn't hard to connect. I think if you want to avoid a debt scam, that the last thing you should do is look for any sort of debt relief solution or opportunity on Craigslist. It's just filled with every sort of worst scam you can imagine. And I know that you look at Craigslist from time to time, too. When I'm short on a story idea, I'll go look at Craigslist and see what the latest crap is.
Yeah, I mean, it's just they know there's a lot of people that go, to that site. It's heavily trafficked, and it's a great place to post stuff up there. But again, remember, anybody with any kind of an idea can create a website and say, "Oh, this is going to work," and make up some testimonies, and this is why it works. And a lot of times, it's not that difficult to believe certain things when you get some of these guys mixing in a lot of different truth, and then they're coupling that with consumers that are looking for something that's the panacea. It's not that hard to convince people that what they're saying might actually be true, and especially if it's so new that you can't even find any negative information yet, people tend to convince themselves that, well, maybe this was the silver bullet I was looking for. And the silver bullet doesn't exist. You didn't get into debt overnight, and you're not going to get out of debt overnight.
All right, so what else is on your plate this week? Anything coming up that we want to let people know to watch for on your site?
Well, yeah, one of the things I've been thinking about for a couple of weeks, and I'm trying to figure out logistically how to put it together on my site, is I'm just getting so tired. I mean, I'm getting clients and consumers calling me almost on a daily basis now, and the story is very similar. They signed up with a front-loaded fee debt settlement company. After a few months, they realized that the service they were actually getting was not very similar to what they were promised in the beginning. And now they're having trouble getting a hold of people there. Creditors are still calling. And then they realize they think they made a mistake. They get online. They find your website or my website. And then they realize, oh, my gosh, I made a huge mistake. This is what these guys are warning people against. And then they call me. And they're now just stuck. And they're trying to figure out, okay, I've lost $1,000 or $2,000. I realize this is not the right program for me. I need to file bankruptcy, or I need to, get into a credit counseling program, or I need to do debt settlement, but just with not these guys. So, and the common theme is, please help me. What can I do? How do I get my money back? And for the most part, these debt settlement companies are not too keen on giving refunds, even though they're not providing services, which, kind of lets you know why they're always insistent on charging their money up front. But so what I want to do is logistically try to figure out a very simple way where people can come to me and come on my site. I know you do this as well, where they can at least share their story and try to help them recoup all or at least most of their money back from a debt settlement company that brings them on board under false pretenses or by not really being totally upfront, and then not providing any service and then keeping their money. And at the very best case scenario is we get a full refund for that client, but worst case scenario, at minimum, what I hope to provide is a forum where consumers can share their experience, which would hopefully serve as a warning to potential future clients of that program, that, look, here's 2 or 3 consumers that went through that already, and after a couple of months realized it wasn't for them, and here was their experience. And I'll let the companies get on and respond and say, hey, this is what happened from our side of the fence, and this is why, if they want to come on and justify why that consumer is not due a refund and want to say all the great services they provided, they're free to do that too.
You kind of stole the wind from my sail there. Or
Oops.
Maybe I just got very forgetful that you were going to do that. Because yesterday I wrote and published how to get out of a debt settlement program and get a big refund.
Well, maybe I'll just copy your article and put it on my blog and be like, yep, there we go.
It's 19 quick steps. Actually, but you know what? I brought up a couple things in writing this, made me think that, not only if you get no satisfaction from the debt settlement company, not only should you complain to the same kind of typical areas, the state attorney general's office, the local Better Business Bureau, the Federal Trade Commission, Consumer Affairs, all that type of stuff, but because of some cases that have been filed recently against third-party escrow companies like Global Client Solutions and Noteworld, I think that people should also send a copy of their complaint to these companies.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. My feeling is, obviously, every situation is different and circumstances are different. Always give the company the benefit of the doubt and the ability to give you a refund and say, look, this is, explain to them why you're canceling, whether it was misrepresented by the salesperson or you didn't quite fully understand it or your circumstances have changed or whatever the reason is, and give them the opportunity to do the right thing. And then if they don't do the right thing in your mind or do what you feel is right and just, and at that point, you can then start. There's a lot of avenues, and I did read that article yesterday or today, where you do lay out some very distinct, simple steps. If you want to get your money back, do this, 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 and this. And at the end of the day, it's really just going to be up to the debt settlement company about whether or not they're going to refund the money or not. But at minimum, at least it puts it out there that somebody had this experience and they weren't able to get that refund. But I kind of was hoping to partner up with you on this anyway, because obviously, again, I'm just a hack with a laptop, and you're an actual writer, and you put out a lot more stuff than I do, and your traffic or your website is much more widely read than mine, of course, is. And what I was hoping to do.
So why the hell am I talking to you?
What was that?
Why the hell am I talking to you?
Because you get all this great information from me, and then you steal it, and then you do it.
That's why.
Then since you put out 4 or 5 stories a day, and I do 4 or 5 a year, I tell you all my ideas, and you say, "Oh, that's good. Let me write that."
And then I write them.
And I'm fine with that, because then you could just say, "Oh, well, if you want some more information on that, then go look at Damon's website because he talks about it too."
It's funny because people ask me about that. They say, why do you talk about Damon so much? And I was going to say something be totally inappropriate, but the reality is that you do individual personal consultations with people, and you talk with people on the phone at length, and you work up a specific plan on how to deal with their situation. And because I spend so much time researching and writing, I just don't have the time to do that. So I appreciate you offering those services to consumers.
Yeah, and I just think it's I kind of fell into that accidentally, just because there was such a huge need for it, and I just found that I was doing that anyway. And people were, "Can I just call you? Can I call you on the phone?" And there's not a lot of resources out there where consumers can sit down and say, "Okay, here's what's going on in my life. Here's what I'm dealing with. Here's the debt I have. Here's what's going on with my family situation. Here's what I'm trying to accomplish. Can you listen to me for 20 minutes or so?" And just tell me what you think I should even be looking at right now. What options should I even be pursuing? What's financially feasible? What's not financially feasible? And then once we narrow it down, can you help me create a plan of attack and help me implement this thing and move forward? Because what they typically just get out there is, I'm going to sell you this thing, or I'm going to sell you this thing, or we've got this debt settlement, or we do credit counseling, or we do bankruptcy. And the consumers can certainly call each of these individual things and try to figure it out on their own, but there's not very many places where they can go into one central place and get information on all of their options as it pertains specifically to them, and then help deciding on what specifically they should do. And for most of my clients, I would say all of my clients, but I don't know for sure, but they get a tremendous amount of relief when they come off the phone, because for the first time they tell me they finally feel like they know where they're at, and they know what their options are, and they can see the light at the end of the tunnel, and they know step by step what they need to do moving forward to achieve that.
So you're telling me that your clients, when they're on their phone, can relieve themselves?
They can do whatever they want because it's not a video chat.
Okay. Thank God. Well, I spent years actually doing that, personal consultations on the phone with people. And what I learned was that by the end of a conversation with a consumer, you can always come up with a plan on how to address the debt. Now, the consumer might not necessarily like the plan, but that doesn't change what reality is. When you get somebody who has no money to pay and has lots of assets and doesn't want to go bankrupt, telling them that you need to talk to a bankruptcy attorney doesn't change the reality of you need to talk to a bankruptcy attorney. But everybody, there's a solution for every problem.
Yeah, there absolutely is. It's just a matter of learning about each of the options and then having somebody that you can trust that's going to say, look, this is why this makes sense. Because the other thing, I don't just tell clients what they should do. I explain to them why I've come to that conclusion. And if they don't reach the same conclusion, that's fine. I mean, my job is not to make them do something. My job is to identify what's possible for them and then tell them why I'm recommending certain things. And then they're perfectly free to disagree with me.
The funny thing is we've brought this podcast full circle because if somebody talks to you, you explain the situation, you talk about the reasons, what they should do, the best course of action. At the end of that conversation, if they decide they're paralyzed and unwilling to do anything, they're going to be right back where we started, being sued, getting a judgment, potentially having their wages garnished, and all of that. You can't stick your head in the sand.
Well, and that's true, but one of the things that I do is when I fully explain all the different options, for most of my clients, they can clearly see it for the first time, whereas before, a lot of what I call the paralysis of analysis.
Yeah.
A lot of that comes from there's just so much information. They're just getting bombarded with this ad and that ad and this company and this option and that option. And there's just everybody's coming at it from their own angle, and we're the best for this and we're the best for that. And that's what really causes a lot of the paralysis of analysis is they just can't seem to get a straight answer. Everybody's telling them something different. But when I get them on the phone, we talk about all of the different things, and then we work through it together. And you're right, though. Even with that, sometimes people will get off the phone. I had a lady, a client I talked to originally back in January. And I told her exactly what to do. I sent her some follow-up information to, step by step what to do. And I never heard from her again. And until about a month ago, I got an email from her, and she said, "Okay, my boss just lost her job, and it freaked me out. And to tell you the truth, I feel very, very bad that I never got back in touch with you. But the truth is, I never even opened your email after we got off the phone because I was just too scared and I wasn't quite ready. But now I'm freaked out. My boss just lost her job. I'm afraid I might be next. And I hope it's not too late, but please call me so we can reevaluate my situation because I need to do something." Sometimes people just mentally aren't ready to go, but at least if they have the information, even if they're not ready to act on that information, at least they have it. They can store it in the back of their mind or whatever. And when that trigger does happen and they realize themselves that they need to do something, they already have the information that they need to act on that.
Well, another thing is that people sometimes are, like you said, they're so overloaded with information, they don't know how to make a good decision. And what they fail to realize is that when they talk to a debt expert like you or me or somebody else who is our peer, we're really not there to sell them anything. Our job is to help explain reality and show them what to do. There's no widget to sell them.
Yeah, and that's why that client that had that the email sitting there for a month. I don't really follow up with my clients if they don't get back to me. I'm not hounding them like, oh, you didn't fill out this, you didn't do that. I'll have my assistant maybe drop them an email once, maybe twice, just to, if I don't hear back from them, just to check in on them to say, hey, did you go meet with the bankruptcy attorney, or did you do this or do that, or just to see if they did the homework I gave them. But it's a very different reality when they call a debt settlement company or something like that. I think that leads to a bigger that fear of paralysis of analysis, where you call the debt settlement company and then you're not sure what to do, and then that sales guy is calling you every day for like 3 weeks because you haven't sent the application back yet. And if you called 4 or 5 companies, imagine that. You're more afraid of the debt settlement companies that are supposed to be there to help you than you are of getting the calls from the creditors. The creditors almost seem tame compared to some of these debt settlement sales guys.
Let me just, in closing, let me just say that if you have listened to everything that Damon has said and you still feel like it makes good sense to go visit his website, you can find him at damonday.com. And if you don't think that I'm full of shit and you don't disagree viscerally with the stuff that I write, you can go to getoutofdebt.org and subscribe to the email list. And I guess the last thing that I want to say is I want to apologize for all the listeners for wasting an hour of their life.
What are you talking about? This is some pretty good information.
No, it's all the good information. But, you could have been on a cruise or something like that. Instead, you've been listening to us.
Well, why couldn't they have been on a cruise and listening to us?
That is true. I didn't even think about that. They could have downloaded it before they got on the ship.
Technology, Steve.
I'll tell you. That's what I'm going to do next time. I'm going to take you on a cruise with me.
I don't know how to respond to that.
Digitally.
We're both married.
Thanks. All right, and so I guess we're going to do this again next week, maybe. And the reason I say maybe is because I'm going to do this 5-day motorcycle trip. I plan to come back all in one piece, but it would be kind of difficult to do this show on the road. But we'll have another one coming up soon, and we'll follow up on the stuff on our sites. Until then, ta-ta.
You've been listening to the Get Out of Debt podcast with Steve Rhode. If you'd like to avoid get out of debt scams, learn how not to be a victim from debt relief offers, get free help for any debt problem, or if you have a question you want to ask, just visit getoutofdebt.org. And while you're on getoutofdebt.org, you can subscribe to the free daily feed for all the latest help and information.